When the world watched, he stayed silent. Axel, a decorated police dog, sat in the middle of a crowded courtroom, motionless. The cameras were rolling. The reporters were waiting for a hero to bark, to point, to reveal the man who shot his handler. But Axel just lowered his head. Some called it failure. The truth was far more human than anyone could imagine. Because behind that silence lay a story of love, sacrifice, and guilt, a bond so deep that words could never describe it. It began on a quiet morning, between a father, his little girl, and the dog who protected them both. It led through fire, blood, and heartbreak, and ended in a moment that would make the entire nation weep. This isn't just the story of a police dog. It's the story of what happens when love becomes its own language. And in the end, when Axel finally spoke, not with words, but with his heart, the whole world listened. The morning air carried the faint chill of dawn, thin wisps of mist curling above the training field behind the police station. The rhythmic sound of boots striking the ground echoed through the stillness. One heavy human step, and beside it, the softer but perfectly synchronized thud of padded paws. Officer Leon Hale ran with the steady control of a man who trusted every breath, every motion, and at his side, like a shadow carved from loyalty itself, ran Axel, the German shepherd who had earned his reputation as the pride of the K-9 division. Even in motion, Axel's form was commanding. His coat glistened under the rising sun, every muscle alive beneath it, moving with precision and purpose. His dark eyes scanned ahead, calculating distances, watching Leon's hand gestures even before they came. He didn't need words. Leon's presence alone was a language he understood. "Easy, boy," Leon murmured, his voice calm, steady. Axel slowed, matching pace instantly. The two stopped near the training posts, both breathing hard, steam rising from their bodies in unison. Leon knelt, running a hand through Axel's fur, rough but affectionate. "Still faster than me, huh?" he said with a half-smile. Axel tilted his head, as if proud, but pretending not to be. They had trained together for 3 years, through heat, cold, rain, and long nights of waiting in silence for danger that sometimes never came. Leon never saw Axel as just a working dog. He was his partner, his guardian, and sometimes his anchor. That morning they moved to the obstacle course. Leaps, tunnels, scent trails. Axel darted through each challenge with laser focus, his paws striking the dirt with confidence. "Search!" Leon commanded. Axel sprinted forward, nose low, weaving through cones until he found the decoy target, barking twice in sharp signal. "Good boy!" Leon's tone softened, his reward not in treats but in pride. Axel leaned briefly into the touch of his gloved hand before sitting straight again, tail still but alert. Discipline and affection, in perfect balance. From the fence at the edge of the field, Sophie, Leon's 4-year-old daughter, watched, her tiny hands gripping the rails. Her hair caught the morning light, and her giggle carried across the yard. "Go, Axel, go!" she shouted, her voice high and clear. Leon turned, his expression shifting from officer to father. "Morning, sunshine. You're up early." "I wanted to see Axel run," Sophie called back. She waved a small stuffed bear, its ear slightly torn, its fur faded from years of love. "He's faster than Daddy." Leon laughed. "Don't tell him that. His ego's big enough already." At the sound of her laugh, Axel's ears perked up. His gaze softened, and he trotted over to the fence. Sophie knelt down, and he pressed his nose through the bars, tail wagging gently as she patted his head. "Hi, Axel," she whispered. "You're my hero." It wasn't the first time she'd said those words. Axel didn't understand them in language, but in tone, in the melody of her trust, he understood everything. He had once barked at a stranger who came too close to her stroller in the park. Since then, Sophie had looked at him with the unshakable belief that he was indestructible. As the sun rose higher, Leon unclipped Axel's leash. "Go on, stretch your legs a bit," he said. Axel bounded toward the nearby river that edged the training grounds. Sophie followed behind, laughing as her father called, "Stay where I can see you, sweetheart." The water shimmered, a mirror of sky. Axel lowered his head, lapping at the edge while Sophie sat nearby, swinging her legs and talking to her teddy bear as if it too were part of their trio. Then, in one careless moment, the bear slipped from her grasp and tumbled into the river. Sophie gasped, leaning forward. "Teddy!" she cried. The current caught the small toy, spinning it away. Before Leon could react, Axel had already moved. He lunged into the water with a powerful leap, the splash echoing across the bank. Sophie froze, her eyes wide. "Axel!" The shepherd swam strong against the current, his body slicing through the cold water. Leon sprinted down the slope, heart pounding, ready to call him back. But Axel wasn't hesitating. His jaws clamped gently around the toy, and he turned, muscles rippling beneath the surface. By the time he reached the shore again, Leon was there, kneeling, hands ready to pull him out. Axel climbed up, drenched and shivering slightly, but his eyes glowed with triumph. He dropped the bear at Sophie's feet. Sophie burst into tears and ran forward, throwing her tiny arms around his wet neck. "You saved him!" she sobbed, clutching both Axel and the dripping Teddy. Axel stood still, breathing hard, but when her little hands wrapped around him, something softened. His tail wagged once, slow and steady, as if to say, "Of course I did." Leon crouched beside them, one hand on Axel's back, the other brushing Sophie's hair. He looked from the dog to his daughter. And in that moment, something wordless passed between all three. It wasn't just loyalty. It was family. "Thank you, partner," Leon whispered quietly. Axel looked up at him, eyes dark and steady, and let out a low, content huff. Leon chuckled softly. "All right, hero. Let's get you dry before the chief sees you've turned the field into a swimming pool." But Sophie didn't let go. She pressed her face into Axel's fur, the toy crushed between them, and whispered so softly that even Leon barely caught it. "Don't ever go away, okay?" Axel's ears flicked at her voice. He stayed still, letting her small arms hold on to him until the wind began to pick up again. The river flowed quietly behind them, carrying away the ripples of what had just happened. To any passerby, it might have seemed like nothing more than a child's love for a family dog. But to Leon, watching the way Axel leaned protectively toward his daughter, even as he trembled from the cold, it meant everything. That was Axel's way: silent devotion, constant watchfulness, and a heart that always placed others before himself. As the morning faded into day, the three of them walked back toward the station, Sophie holding her Teddy close, Axel walking between her and Leon, always just half a step closer to danger, if it ever came. In that ordinary moment, they looked like a picture of peace. A man, a child, and a dog bound together by invisible threads of love and trust. But none of them knew. that this peaceful morning would be the last before everything changed. Before gunfire would tear through their quiet world, and Axel's loyalty would be tested in ways no training could ever prepare him for. The city at night had its own rhythm, the hum of traffic fading into distant sirens, the metallic click of streetlights switching on one by one, and the faint whisper of wind moving through alleyways where trouble liked to hide. For Officer Leon Hale, this was familiar music, the kind that kept his senses sharp. But for Axel, sitting in the passenger seat of the patrol car, it was something deeper, a language of tension he could smell, hear, and feel in his bones. The radio crackled to life. Unit 7, report of a possible break-in at the old Harrow warehouse, District 4. Multiple suspects. Proceed with caution. Leon flicked on the siren. Copy that. Unit 7 en route. He glanced at Axel, whose ears perked immediately. Looks like it's just us tonight, partner. Axel let out a low whine. Not fear, but readiness. His amber eyes caught the flashing blue lights, reflecting them like embers. Minutes later, the patrol car rolled to a stop outside the abandoned warehouse, a massive shadow rising against the night sky. One of the doors hung ajar, creaking slightly. The air smelled of rust, oil, and something faintly metallic, like blood or danger waiting to unfold. Leon stepped out, checking his flashlight and weapon. Stay close, boy, he whispered. Axel slipped beside him, paws silent on the gravel. Inside, the warehouse was a graveyard of machinery and echoes. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, catching glimpses of old crates, broken glass, and peeling paint. Somewhere in the back, a metallic clang rang out, too deliberate to be coincidence. Leon froze. His instincts screamed ambush. Hold, Axel, he murmured, raising a hand. The dog halted instantly, muscles tensed, eyes fixed forward. The silence between them was charged. One command, one trust. A shadow moved, then another. Two figures, masked, quick, confident. Police! Hands where I can see them! Leon's voice thundered through the empty space. One of the men froze. The other bolted. Leon turned, following with his light. Stay! He commanded sharply. Axel crouched, every nerve vibrating, waiting for the word to move. But then, the gunshot. The sound cracked like lightning through steel. Leon staggered backward, the flashlight tumbling from his hand, rolling across the floor and throwing dizzy arcs of light over rusted walls. Axel's bark exploded into the air, fierce, desperate. Leon fell. The echo of the shot lingered longer than his cry. Axel! The word broke off in a gasp. The masked figures fled through the rear door, vanishing into the night. Axel lunged forward, barking into the darkness, then spun back, his instincts tearing him between duty and devotion. Leon lay motionless, a dark stain spreading across his uniform. The smell of blood filled the air, sharp and metallic. Axel whined, pressing his nose to Leon's chest, nudging his shoulder, as if willing him to rise. Get up, his eyes seemed to say. We're not done. But Leon didn't move. Axel let out a sound that wasn't quite a bark. It was deeper, raw, the kind of noise that came from pain no training could silence. He looked around wildly, tail low, scanning for help. His training screamed control. His heart screamed save him. He pressed closer, lowering his body protectively over Leon's torso, growling at the shadows. Minutes felt like hours before the sound of sirens filled the distance. Blue and red lights washed over the warehouse walls. Axel didn't move. He stood guard, teeth bared at anyone who came near. "Easy! It's okay! It's police!" an officer shouted, approaching cautiously. But Axel didn't trust them. When one of the paramedics tried to reach Leon, Axel snapped, a warning growl rolling from deep in his chest. His eyes were wild, torn between fear and fury. "Get him under control!" someone yelled. Leon's blood had soaked through Axel's fur, dark against his coat. The dog's breathing came fast and heavy, his ears flattened. A familiar voice broke through the noise. "Axel, stand down!" It was Captain Morris, Leon's superior. The man's voice was steady, but heavy with something Axel recognized. Grief. Axel hesitated. His eyes darted from Leon's pale face to the captain's outstretched hand. Slowly, his growl faded. He stepped back, allowing the medics to reach his partner. They lifted Leon onto a stretcher. Blood dripped onto the concrete in dark, silent beads. Axel followed them to the ambulance, his paws leaving faint red prints behind. When the doors closed, he whined once, sharp, aching, before the engine roared away. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and silence. Hours later, long after midnight, Axel sat in the corner of the corridor, unmoving. His leash was tied loosely to a bench, but he didn't need restraint. His head rested on Leon's blood-stained jacket, folded beside him. The only thing they had let him keep. Nurses passed by quietly, whispering about the K9 who wouldn't leave. Some tried to coax him away with food, but he didn't touch it. His eyes stayed fixed on the door where Leon had been taken. Once a young intern reached down trying to take the jacket to clean it. Axel's growl rumbled low in warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. Captain Morris appeared again, his face worn and grim. "He's in surgery, boy. They're doing all they can." Axel didn't blink. He pressed his nose deeper into the jacket, inhaling the fading scent of gunpowder, sweat, and his master's touch. Morris crouched beside him, voice soft. "You did good tonight. It wasn't your fault." But Axel didn't understand words like fault or fate. All he knew was that Leon had fallen, and he hadn't stopped it. The sounds of the gunshot replayed in his mind, echoing against the sterile hum of machines beyond the door. Hours passed. The night gave way to dawn. The hallway lights dimmed to gray. Axel stayed where he was, a silent sentinel keeping vigil. When Leon's wife, Claire, arrived with little Sophie clinging to her hand, Axel finally stirred. Sophie's eyes were swollen from crying. "Axel," she whispered, "is Daddy okay?" The dog lowered his head, tail still, eyes heavy with something almost human, sorrow. Claire knelt beside him, tears falling freely. She touched his head, her fingers trembling. "You stayed with him. Thank you." Axel didn't move. He pressed his paw over the jacket, as if guarding what remained of his partner. Somewhere beyond the closed doors, the sound of a monitor beeped steadily. And in the dim corridor, a German shepherd sat alone beside a bloodied piece of cloth, a silent guardian of a wounded hero, his body still, his heart restless, as if vowing, "I will not fail again." The world had become quieter since the night of the shooting. Too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't bring peace, only weight. Inside room 312, the steady rhythm of a heart monitor kept time with a man who had once lived by action. Officer Leon Hale lay motionless, his face pale against the white sheets. The machines breathed for him now, their beeps echoing faintly down the sterile hospital corridor. Outside that door, Chained to a metal railing, Axel waited. He hadn't left since the night they brought Leon in. His fur was dull now, stiff in patches where dried blood had refused to wash away completely. His eyes, once sharp and alert, seemed distant, always fixed on the door that never opened. Every time it moved, even slightly, Axel would lift his head, ears pricking with a fragile hope. But it was always a nurse, or an officer, or a passerby, never Leon. The hospital staff had learned to move around him. Some whispered in pity, others in admiration. But no one dared try to pull him away. Once a janitor tried to coax him from his post with food. Axel didn't even glance at it. The plate sat untouched until morning. "Poor guy's losing himself," a nurse murmured one day, shaking her head. Inside the K9 unit's office, the tone was harsher. "He's unstable," said Chief Warren, his jaw tight as he signed off reports. "Until Officer Hale recovers, that dog stays out of active service." Captain Morris tried to argue, but the chief only raised a hand. "He attacked a paramedic trying to help. He's unpredictable." "Unpredictable?" Morris shot back quietly. "He's grieving." But grief wasn't a category on the official reports, so Axel was marked as sidelined until further evaluation. Days blurred into weeks. The hospital's garden, once bright with the sound of Axel's bark and Sophie's laughter, now seemed gray and muted. Sophie came every day, holding her mother's hand, a bundle of drawings tucked under her arm. She would go inside Leon's room, climb onto the chair beside him, and show her pictures, scribbled crayons of smiling stick figures. "This is you, Daddy. This is me. And this is Axel." She always drew him right beside them, tail wagging, proud and alive. But Leon never stirred. When she came back outside, she'd kneel beside Axel, her little voice trembling. "He's still sleeping," she would say. "But Mommy says you can hear people when you sleep, so he knows we're here." Axel's ears twitched at her voice. He leaned forward, pressing his nose to her hand. For a moment his tail moved, just once, before going still again. He had stopped barking days ago. Even his breath came shallow, slow. It was as though the light in his eyes had dimmed along with Leon's heartbeat. Sometimes at night, when the hospital grew quiet, Axel would lift his head to the moonlight that poured through the glass doors. He would stare at it, unmoving, while memories came in flashes, unbidden, sharp, cruel. Leon's voice calling commands in the field. "Hold, Axel, good boy!" The echo of laughter as Sophie squealed when Axel chased her around the backyard. The smell of Leon's uniform, sweat, leather, and trust. Then, the gunshot, the fall, the blood. Each memory cut like glass, and with every one, Axel lowered his head, as if ashamed that he could remember so vividly, and still had failed. Claire, Leon's wife, tried to take him home one evening. She knelt beside him, her face lined with exhaustion. "Come on, Axel," she pleaded softly. "You can't stay out here forever." But Axel didn't move. She sighed, defeated, and whispered, "He wouldn't want you to suffer like this." Axel only blinked slowly, his gaze fixed on the hospital door once again. That night, the moon was bright and low, silvering the hospital courtyard. The wind carried the faint scent of rain and asphalt. The guards had locked up, the halls quiet except for the low hum of machines. Sometime after midnight, a small figure appeared at the end of the corridor. Sophie, wrapped in a too-big sweater, her slippers barely making a sound as she tiptoed past the nurse's station. She clutched a folded blanket in one hand and a small flashlight in the other. When she reached the doors, she pushed them open just enough to slip through. The chain on Axel's collar clinked softly as he lifted his head. She whispered, closing the door behind her. "It's just me." Axel's ears perked. For a moment, the dullness in his eyes faded. Sophie hurried to him, her small face glowing under the moonlight. "I told Mommy I was sleepy," she said, lowering herself beside him. "But I couldn't sleep. I wanted to see you." Axel tilted his head, watching her. She unwrapped the blanket and placed it over his back. "It's cold tonight," she said softly. Then she looked up at the hospital windows, her little voice trembling. "Daddy's gonna wake up soon. I know it." Axel moved closer. He pressed his nose to her cheek, then laid his head gently on her small shoulder. The warmth of her touch was different from Leon's, softer, but full of something he understood completely. Love without fear. Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Her eyes shimmered with tears she was too young to hide. "You're sad, huh?" she whispered. "Don't be. Daddy's strong. He'll come back. And when he does, we'll all go home. You'll run again. Promise?" Axel didn't move, but his breathing changed, slow and heavy, almost trembling. His fur was damp from the night air, and under the moonlight, Sophie's tears glistened as they fell onto it, merging with the dew. For a long time, they stayed like that. A child and a dog in the quiet of a hospital courtyard, two souls bound by the same waiting. Eventually, Sophie's voice faded into a whisper. "Daddy will wake up soon." Her tiny hand rested on his paw. Axel lowered his head, fully now, eyes half closed, a soft exhale escaping him, something between a sigh and a vow. Above them, the sky stretched wide and pale. A single star flickered in the distance, faint but stubborn. And in that fragile stillness, where innocence met loyalty, Axel's silence was no longer empty. It was filled with something deeper, heavier, almost sacred. He would wait, however long it took, however deep the loneliness cut. Axel would wait for Leon to open his eyes, because that's what partners did. The day began with a fragile kind of hope, the kind that lives quietly between pain and prayer. The morning sun poured through the hospital windows, painting gold over the sterile white. Sophie sat cross-legged on a bench outside the entrance, clutching a paper crane she'd folded from one of her coloring pages. Her mother was inside, speaking to the doctors again. Beside her, Axel lay motionless. His chain had been loosened, allowing him a few feet of space, but he never strayed far from the glass doors that separated him from Leon. His fur had grown dull from sleepless nights, but his eyes followed Sophie wherever she went. Her smallest movement, her soft voice, every fragile breath. "Mommy says maybe Daddy's eyes will open soon," Sophie murmured, rocking the paper crane between her fingers. "If he sees us here, maybe he'll remember." Axel tilted his head, one ear flicking as if he understood. Sophie smiled faintly, the kind of smile that came only from a child who still believed that love alone could wake someone from endless sleep. She stood and stretched her arms, the wind catching her hair. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few cars moving slowly toward the exit. "Let's go see the flowers, Axel," she said, pointing toward a small garden patch near the fence. Axel rose immediately, his chain dragging lightly against the pavement as they walked. The air was calm, too calm, the kind of calm that always comes before disaster. She crouched by the flowers, talking softly to them as if they could listen. These are Daddy's favorite colors, she said, plucking one to tuck behind Axel's collar. Now you look like a hero again. Axel gave a small, rumbling huff. Across the lot, an engine roared, louder than it should have. Sophie turned her head just as a silver sedan came skidding around the corner, tires screaming. The driver, distracted, panicked, or drunk, didn't see the child standing in the open. Everything happened in half a heartbeat. Sophie froze. The paper crane slipped from her hand, fluttering in the wind. Axel moved. A blur of black and tan fur, a burst of motion fueled by instinct stronger than thought. He lunged forward, slamming into Sophie's small body with enough force to knock her asint. The sound of the impact was brutal. The sickening thud of metal against flesh and bone. The car screeched to a stop several feet away, the driver shouting in horror. Sophie lay on the ground, her arm scraped and bleeding, but alive. Axel, however, did not move. "Axel!" Sophie cried, scrambling toward him. Her small hands trembled as she touched his side. "Axel, wake up, please!" His breathing was shallow, uneven. Blood pooled beneath his shoulder, staining the pavement dark red. His eyes blinked slowly, focusing on her face, then her arm. Sophie's left arm was cut deep, a jagged wound across the tender skin, already swelling. She winced, but ignored it, pressing both her hands to his fur to stop the bleeding. "You're okay," she whispered, tears mixing with the dirt on her cheeks. "You have to be okay." Hospital staff rushed out moments later, shouting orders, calling for help. The driver stumbled from the car, stammering apologies, but Sophie couldn't hear anything except the faint whine coming from Axel's throat. Claire ran from the entrance, her face pale. She scooped Sophie into her arms, gasping when she saw the wound on her daughter's arm. "Oh God, Sophie!" "I'm fine," the little girl sobbed. "Help him! Mommy, please help Axel!" Two orderlies lifted the dog onto a stretcher meant for human patients. One of them muttered, "He's lucky he's alive." The other whispered, "He's the K9 from the shooting. The hero dog." The words echoed faintly as they disappeared inside. Sophie clung to her mother, blood soaking through the sleeve of her dress. The hospital became a place of two silences that day. One behind the door of room 312, where Leon slept beneath the machines, and another in the small recovery wing, where Axel lay bandaged and still. Sophie, her arm wrapped in white gauze, moved between them like a little ghost. Her mother wanted her to rest, but she refused. She slipped away when the nurses weren't looking, her tiny footsteps soft against the cold tile floors. When she reached Axel's room, she hesitated at the door. He was lying on his side, one paw in a cast, the other covered in tape and bandages. The rhythm of his breathing was slow, heavy, but steady. She stepped closer, dragging a chair with her. The sound made him stir. His eyes opened, groggy, tired, and when they met hers, they softened. "Hey, boy," she whispered, climbing onto the chair. "You scared me." Axel's tail moved once, weakly. He tried to lift his head, but pain forced him down again. Sophie reached out with her uninjured arm and brushed his ear. "It's okay," she said. "You can rest now." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The kind of quiet that holds more words than speech ever could. Finally, Sophie held up her bandaged arm. "See this?" she said, voice trembling but proud. "You saved me. The doctor said I'll have a scar, but I don't mind. I think it's like a medal." Axel blinked slowly, his gaze fixed on the little girl's determined face. She reached out again, placing her small hand gently over his wrapped paw. Her voice dropped to a whisper, fragile and certain. "You saved me. I'll save you too. I promise." Something in those words, the innocence, the truth, settled in the room like light breaking through clouds. Axel didn't understand the language, but he understood the feeling. The warmth of her touch, the tone of her voice. It was the same one Leon used when he said, "Good boy." His eyes closed again, and for the first time since the warehouse, his breathing steadied, deep and calm. Sophie stayed beside him until she fell asleep, her small hand still resting on his paw. The moonlight spilled through the window, painting both of them in silver. The faint sound of Leon's heart monitor echoed from down the hall, steady and patient, like a promise being kept. And somewhere, deep in Axel's tired heart, something shifted. A spark, small but bright. He had protected her with his body. Now she was protecting him with her hope. That night, a child and a dog forged a bond beyond words. A vow written not in ink, but in blood, scars, and love that refused to fade. Spring had come and gone by the time Leon Hale opened his eyes. The sterile white of the hospital ceiling was the first thing he saw. Bright, unfamiliar, and unreal. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the sharp scent of antiseptic hit him, followed by the rhythmic beeping of a machine nearby. He tried to move, but pain flared down his side. "Leon?" a voice whispered. He turned his head, slowly, painfully, and saw Claire, her eyes red from sleepless nights. Beside her stood Sophie, clutching a worn stuffed bear to her chest. When Leon tried to speak, his throat felt dry, his voice nothing more than a rasp. "How long?" "Almost 3 months," Claire said softly. "You've been in a coma." Leon blinked, disoriented. 3 months? He searched their faces, but memory came in fragments, flashing lights, shouting, a gunshot. Then nothing. His chest tightened. "Axel," Claire smiled through tears. "He's alive, hurt, but healing. He never left the hospital. Neither did Sophie." Leon's eyes closed briefly in relief. "Good boy." But when he opened them again, something was missing. Pieces of memory that refused to surface, like broken film spliced together wrong. He couldn't remember the faces of the men in the warehouse. He couldn't remember who pulled the trigger. That absence haunted him more than the wound in his sinhuatsen. Weeks later, Leon sat in a wheelchair near the rehab garden, pale but awake. Axel lay at his feet, scarred but strong again. His coat had regained its sheen, and his posture, though calmer, still carried the pride of a trained protector. Leon reached down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "I can't remember," he murmured. "But you do, don't you?" Axel looked up, eyes steady. He didn't blink. Leon smiled faintly. "You always did." Captain Morris approached across the courtyard, a manila folder tucked under his arm. His expression was serious, too serious. "Morning, Cap," Leon greeted. "Leon," Morris began, his tone cautious. "There's been a development." Leon's brow furrowed. The detectives finally caught someone. Evan Kane. The name stirred something faint and unpleasant in Leon's fogged mind. That name sounds familiar. It should, Morris said grimly. He used to wear a badge. Fired 5 years ago for taking payoffs, though it was buried in paperwork. He's connected to the men we traced from the warehouse, but he hesitated. There's no physical evidence tying him to your shooting. Leon exhaled. So it's his word against yours, and you can't remember enough to testify. The silence between them deepened. Axel lifted his head, sensing tension in the air. Then how do they plan to prove it? Leon asked finally. Morris's eyes flicked toward Axel. That's where things get complicated. Leon frowned. Don't tell me. They're asking if Axel can identify the shooter. The words hung there like smoke. You mean? Leon's voice cracked. They want a dog to testify? Not in the traditional sense, Morris said quickly. The prosecutor wants to bring Axel into court during suspect identification. If he reacts, if he recognizes the man, it could influence the jury. Publicly, it's being called behavioral testimony. Leon shook his head in disbelief. You can't be serious. Morris sighed. I wish I wasn't. But the press already caught wind of it. They're running with headlines like, "The dog who saw the shooter." The department's under pressure. People want justice. They want a story. Leon looked down at Axel, who was resting his chin on his lap, calm but alert. And what if he's wrong? What if they twist his reaction into whatever they want it to be? That's not up to us anymore, Morris said quietly. They've issued a summons for the both of you. Next week. When the story broke, the media storm was relentless. Every channel carried it. Can a dog deliver justice? Trial of the century or publicity stunt? Axel, the silent witness. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse. Journalists crowded the steps like vultures, waiting for the moment when the famous K9 would arrive. They played footage of Axel's previous service, tracking fugitives, saving lives, and painted him as both hero and spectacle. Talk shows debated his credibility. Some mocked the absurdity of it all, while others spoke reverently of his loyalty. In the midst of the chaos, Sophie stood beside her mother, holding her small hand tightly. She was 6 now, her face rounder, her eyes wiser. The faint scar on her arm, a pale line beneath her sleeve, glimmered in the sunlight whenever she lifted her hand to shield her eyes from the cameras. To her, the world's noise meant nothing. She didn't care about justice, headlines, or politics. She only knew that her father had been hurt, and Axel, her best friend, had seen the man who did it. Inside the courthouse lobby, Leon sat quietly in his wheelchair, wearing a suit that still felt too formal for the man who once wore a badge. Axel sat at his side, harness gleaming, posture perfect. Claire knelt beside Sophie, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Stay close to me, okay? Sophie nodded, her little hand gripping the hem of her mother's coat. She looked down at Axel, who met her gaze. For a moment, the noise of the crowd seemed to fade. Axel's brave, she whispered. He'll remember. Leon overheard her, his throat tightening. He wanted to believe it, that somewhere inside that loyal mind, Axel still held the memory of that night. But what if the memory hurt him too? The courtroom doors opened with a heavy groan, and the sullen prosecutor approached. Officer Hale, it's time. Leon swallowed hard. He placed a steadying hand on Axel's shoulder. Ready, partner? Axel didn't move, but his tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. Not excitement, but acknowledgement. As they rolled forward, cameras flashed in a storm of light. Reporters shouted questions. Can Axel really testify? Is this justice or theater? What if the dog attacks the wrong man? Leon ignored them all. The only sound that mattered was the soft rhythm of Axel's paws against the marble floor. Behind them, Sophie pressed her hand against her scar, her quiet talisman of hope, and whispered under her breath, almost like a prayer, "Be brave, Axel. Daddy needs you." The courtroom doors closed, and for the first time since the night of the shooting, the world would watch in silence as a dog was asked to speak, not with words, but with his heart. The courtroom was colder than Leon expected, not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning or marble floors. This was the chill of judgment, of eyes that measured truth not by heart, but by evidence. Cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking like watchful eyes. Every seat was filled, reporters, officers, onlookers, all waiting to see something they had never witnessed before. A dog called to testify. Axel entered through the side door, walking steadily beside Captain Morris. His coat shone under the harsh overhead lights, his K9 vest fastened snugly across his chest, the words "police unit" stitched proudly on the side. But there was no spark of excitement in him, only focus, and something deeper in his eyes. A quiet sadness that even those closest to him couldn't ignore. The clicking of cameras echoed through the room. "Order!" barked the judge. A stern woman with silver hair pulled tight. "This is a court of law, not a circus. Proceed with decorum." The murmurs dimmed. Leon sat near the witness stand, pale but upright, his left hand still trembling slightly from the lingering effects of recovery. Sophie and Claire sat behind him. Sophie's legs swung nervously, her small hands clutching the hem of her dress. The prosecutor, Miss Rayner, rose from her seat. "Your Honor, the K9 unit was present at the crime scene and is believed to have direct recognition of the perpetrator. We ask permission to conduct a controlled identification test." The judge sighed. "You're aware how unorthodox this is, Ms. Rayner?" "Yes, Your Honor. But we're also aware that the defendant's former occupation and connections have made witnesses scarce. This dog is not an ordinary animal. He is a trained officer with 3 years of active service." The defense attorney smirked. "So we're putting a dog on the stand now? Should I prepare for a cross-examination too?" Laughter rippled through the courtroom before the judge's gavel struck. "Enough. The motion is granted, but let the record show the court proceeds under protest. Ms. Rayner, proceed." Leon exhaled slowly. He could feel his pulse drumming behind his ribs. "Axel," he whispered softly, his voice hoarse. "Just breathe, boy. You've got this." Morris knelt beside Axel, unclipping his leash. "You remember your job, partner," he murmured, voice steady but heavy. "Just do what you always do." Across the room, the suspects sat in a row. 5 men, all wearing neutral expressions, each watched by guards. The last of them was Evan Kane, a man with a soldier's build, his jaw tight, his eyes unreadable. The judge nodded. "Begin." Ms. Rayner turned toward Axel, her tone calm but commanding. "Officer Axel," she said, using the name like a title, "do you recognize any of these men?" A ripple of tension passed through the room. Axel's ears flicked. He moved forward slowly, nails clicking against the polished floor. His head was low, his nose lifted slightly as he scanned the row of faces. The air seemed to hold its breath. One man coughed, another shifted uneasily. Leon leaned forward in his seat. "That's it, boy. You've got this." he whispered under his breath. Axel stopped midway. His gaze passed from one man to another, sharp and deliberate. His tail didn't move. His breathing deepened. Then, he turned away. He walked to the center of the room, looked once at Leon, and sat down. Nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Ms. Rayner's brow furrowed. "Axel," she said again, more firmly. "Find him." No reaction. Axel remained still, gaze distant, ears slightly drooped. "Axel!" The prosecutor's voice cracked now, pleading. "Do you recognize the suspect?" Still nothing. He turned his head slightly, his eyes flicking towards Sophie. The little girl's breath hitched. She sat frozen, clutching the scar on her arm beneath her sleeve, as if the touch might somehow reach him. Axel's gaze lingered on her for a long second, then dropped to Leon's bandaged hand resting on the edge of the witness stand. His expression changed, softer, almost pained, before he turned his head away completely. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Well," he said lightly, "looks like your star witness has stage fright." The room erupted into whispers. Leon clenched his fists. "Come on, Axel," he whispered, almost begging now. "Don't shut down on me. Not now." But Axel didn't move. He sat still, tail flat on the ground, his breathing shallow. His eyes had gone distant, unfocused. The same look Leon had seen in soldiers after too many battles, too many losses. To everyone else it looked like disobedience. But Leon saw the truth. This wasn't defiance. It was guilt. The same guilt that had haunted him since the day of the shooting. He remembered Sophie's words the night before. "He still feels sad, Daddy. I can tell." Now Leon could see it. The weight in Axel's eyes. The way he avoided looking at the suspect, as though he feared what memory would surface if he did. "Your Honor," the defense attorney said smoothly, standing, "I move to dismiss this farce. Clearly, the dog's behavior cannot be interpreted as evidence of anything. For all we know, he's reacting to the lights, the people, or his own reflection." Ms. Rayner's voice trembled. "This dog has saved more lives than anyone in this room. He's trained to recognize danger." The attorney cut her off. "Then maybe he's decided there isn't any danger here." The judge sighed, rubbing her temples. "Enough. The court will take this under advisement." But the damage was done. Leon looked at Axel, his heart heavy. The same dog who had once leapt into burning buildings, who had taken a bullet's aftermath without fear, now sat frozen in the center of the room, silent, unmoving, broken. The flash of cameras erupted again, capturing the image that would headline every newspaper by morning. The hero, dog who fell silent. Sophie's small voice whispered from the back, trembling with confusion. "Why isn't he doing anything, Mommy?" Claire pulled her close, unable to answer. Axel's head lowered slowly, his ears flattening as if the sound of her voice hurt. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply stared at the floor, as if ashamed of his own silence. And in that stillness, the entire courtroom seemed to feel the same cold truth. Even heroes can break. The next morning, the courthouse was wrapped in a heavy stillness, the kind that comes after disappointment. The headlines from the day before still stung. "Hero dog fails to identify shooter." The public had turned divided, half skeptical, half heartbroken. Inside the courtroom, tension hung like fog. The trial was nearly over. The defense looked smug, confident that the case was slipping through the prosecution's fingers. Leon sat silently at the witness bench, his shoulders hunched, a shadow of the man he had been. And at his feet, Axel lay motionless, his head resting between his paws, eyes dull. The proud K9 looked smaller now, almost fragile beneath the fluorescent lights. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, her voice tired but steady, "we request a final recess before closing arguments." The judge, weary, gray-haired, and kind despite the sternness of her robe, nodded. "Granted. 15 minutes." The gavel struck lightly. People rose, whispering among themselves. Reporters began typing their drafts. The defense attorney leaned back in his chair, smiling to himself. "All that training," he murmured to a colleague, "and in the end, he's just a dog." Leon heard him. His hands clenched, but he said nothing. His gaze drifted to Axel, who hadn't lifted his head in hours. He wanted to reach down, to tell him it wasn't his fault, but the words stuck in his throat. He didn't know that at that very moment, Sophie was standing in the hallway outside, her small face pressed to the glass door, watching. She had begged her mother to bring her today. Claire had refused at first. "It's too much for you, sweetheart." But Sophie was stubborn in that quiet, determined way that only children could be. "Axel needs me," she had said. Now she could see him through the crack in the doorway. Her hero, lying still on the polished floor, surrounded by strangers who didn't understand him. Time 300 pems. Her heart hurt in a way she couldn't name. Before anyone could stop her, Sophie slipped through the gap in the door and ran inside. "Sophie!" Claire gasped behind her, but the little girl was already halfway down the aisle. Her shoes tapped against the tile, echoing through the hushed room. "Order!" "What?" the judge started, startled. "Who let this child—" But before she could finish, Sophie was there, right in front of Axel. The entire courtroom froze. Cameras turned. Reporters lifted their phones, whispering furiously. Leon tried to stand, pain shooting through his ribs. "Sophie, sweetheart, you can't—" But she didn't look at him. Her eyes were on Axel. She knelt down beside him, small and trembling. Her voice, though quiet, carried through the room like the echo of something pure. "Hi, Axel." Axel's ears twitched, but he didn't lift his head. Sophie frowned, her little brow creasing. "Why are you lying down? You're supposed to be brave." The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor." The judge raised a hand, her voice gentler now. "Let her speak." Sophie turned to look at the people watching her. All these adults in black suits and serious faces, waiting for rules and evidence to decide what was true. "He didn't move yesterday," she said, "because he's sad." A ripple of surprise passed through the room. The defense attorney gave a quiet scoff. "Sad?" Sophie nodded. "He thinks he hurt me." Axel's eyes flickered. For the first time he looked up, just barely, at her voice. Sophie's tiny hands reached for her sleeve. She pushed it up to her elbow, revealing the faded scar that curved across her soft skin. The light caught it, turning it pale silver. Gasps moved through the courtroom. Cameras zoomed in. "This," Sophie said softly, "is from the car. The day he saved me." She glanced at Axel. "He jumped in front of me. He got hurt too. But he doesn't know I'm okay. He thinks it's his fault." Leon's throat tightened. He felt every word like a weight pressing into his chest. Sophie turned back to the judge, eyes glistening. "He's not broken. He's just scared. Because sometimes when you love someone, and they get hurt, you think it's your fault. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the hum of the overhead lights seemed to fade. The judge blinked rapidly, reaching for a tissue. Sophie turned again to Axel and lowered herself fully to the floor. She whispered so softly that only those close could hear, "You didn't hurt me. You saved me." Her voice trembled. "You remember? You saved Daddy too. You're the bravest one here." Axel's chest rose sharply. His head lifted a little higher. Sophie smiled through tears. Then she leaned closer, resting her small forehead against his. "We're a team. Always." The words slipped from her lips like a secret, a promise only he could hear. Something changed in Axel's eyes then. A flicker, faint but alive. His ears pricked forward. His tail moved once, slow and deliberate. Leon couldn't breathe. He saw it, the spark returning, the light that had dimmed for so long. Axel looked at Sophie, then at Leon, then back again. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism and noise, seemed to dissolve into the background. There was only the child, the scar, and the dog who had carried her pain like his own. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, his smirk gone. The judge finally spoke, her voice thick. "Let the record show that sometimes truth doesn't always come from words." Sophie looked up, uncertain. "Did I do something bad?" The judge shook her head slowly. "No, sweetheart. You reminded us what loyalty looks like." Leon's vision blurred as he whispered, "That's my girl." Sophie smiled shyly, then looked back at Axel and brushed her fingers over his fur. "You can. Rest now," she said. "It's okay to remember." And for the first time since that night in the warehouse, Axel leaned forward, pressing his nose against her scar. It was as if he was acknowledging what she had said, not with a bark, but with something deeper, understanding. Outside, flashes from the press continued through the courthouse windows. But inside, no one cared about cameras anymore. For the first time in months, the courtroom didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a reunion. A wounded man, a little girl, and a loyal dog, bound by loss, by love, and by something the law could never measure: forgiveness. The room was so still you could hear the hum of the lights above. Sophie's small hand still rested on Axel's fur. Her words, "We're a team," lingering in the air like a sacred echo. No one dared move. The judge, the lawyers, even the court stenographer had forgotten their tasks. Axel lifted his head. His ears twitched, sharp and alert, that familiar trained motion everyone in the K9 unit recognized. The air around him seemed to change, charged with an unseen energy. His nostrils flared, pulling in every scent that filled the courtroom: paper, polished wood, sweat, perfume, fear. Then something caught him. A trace, faint but undeniable. His breathing quickened. A flash cut through his mind, so vivid it almost hurt. The sound of a car's tires screeching. The cry of a child. The metallic scent of blood. Sophie's scream. The gunshot. Leon's body hitting the ground. And through it all, that smell. Sharp, bitter, mixed with oil and gunpowder. It was here. Axel rose slowly, every muscle coiled tight beneath his coat. His eyes, once dulled by sorrow, burned now with a clarity that silenced every whisper. Sophie froze, watching him. Leon's heart pounded. He recognized that stance, the stillness before the storm. "Axel?" he said quietly. But the dog didn't look at him. His head turned toward the row of suspects. His nostrils flared again. One by one, he passed over each man, their fear spiking with every step he took. And then he stopped. Evan Kane. The former officer sat stiffly in his chair, eyes darting between the prosecutor and the judge. Sweat glistened on his brow. The moment Axel's gaze locked onto him, Kane's hand twitched, just slightly, as if to adjust his collar. A nervous reflex, small but telling. The movement was enough. Axel's pupils dilated. His fur bristled along his spine. A deep, guttural growl rumbled up from his chest. Not wild, but purposeful, primal. The sound made the hairs on every neck in the room stand on end. The defense attorney half rose, alarmed. "What's happening? Get that animal." Before he could finish, Axel moved. He lunged forward with a force that shook the room, his leash snapping free from Leon's weakened grasp. The thundering of paws against marble echoed like thunder. "Axel!" Leon shouted, his voice sharp with both fear and awe. The shepherd's bark exploded, deep and furious, echoing through the chamber. People gasped and stumbled back. Axel skidded to a stop, right in front of Evan Kane. For one suspended heartbeat, the two locked eyes. Kane froze. Axel's teeth were bared, but he didn't bite. He didn't need to. The truth was already written across every trembling inch of the man's body. The prosecutor's voice trembled. "Mr. Kane, why is the dog reacting to you?" I don't know," Kane stammered, his face pale. It's just a dog. But his words cracked halfway through. His leg jiggled uncontrollably, the tremor of guilt betrayed by instinct. Axel's growl deepened, low and steady. His body blocked Kane's escape entirely. The once broken hero now stood tall, chest forward, every fiber alive with focus. His silence had shattered, replaced with something purer than words: truth. Leon struggled to his feet, clutching the edge of the table for balance. "Axel!" he called out. "Stand down!" But Axel didn't move. He held Kane in his sights, his entire body trembling with emotion that went beyond training. It was recognition. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Leon stepped forward, his voice softer now. "It's okay, boy. It's okay." Axel's ears twitched. Slowly, his eyes shifted from Kane to Leon, then to Sophie. The girl was crying, not from fear, but from something deeper: relief. Axel's breathing began to steady. He took one step back, then another, his gaze never leaving Kane. And in that stillness, everyone in the room knew. Axel had just identified the man responsible. The defense attorney shouted, "This proves nothing. He's reacting to noise or movement or—" But the words fell flat. Kane's own expression had already betrayed him. Sweat streamed down his temple, his lips trembled, and his eyes darted desperately toward the exits. "Mr. Kane," the judge said sharply, "remain seated." Kane's composure broke. "It wasn't supposed to go that far," he blurted, his voice cracking. Gasps erupted from the gallery. The prosecutor froze mid-note, her pen hovering in the air. Leon's chest tightened, his breath caught. He heard it, the confession hidden inside panic. The judge's gavel slammed down. "Bailiff!" Two officers rushed forward, grabbing Kane by the shoulders. He struggled, shouting, "It was an accident! I didn't mean to shoot him. The dog, he attacked. But his words were drowned out by the roar of the room. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed like lightning, and in the center of it all stood Axel, still and calm now, his body tense but peaceful, like a warrior who had finally finished the fight he was born for. Leon limped toward him, ignoring the chaos, the flashing lights, the shouting. He knelt, his hand trembling as he reached for Axel's collar. "You did it," he whispered. His voice broke. "You did it, partner." Axel looked up at him, tail giving one small, slow wag. Leon's fingers tightened around his fur, grounding himself in the warmth of the creature who had never stopped believing, even when the world doubted him. Sophie broke free from Claire's arms and ran forward. She threw her arms around Axel's neck, burying her face in his fur. "I knew you'd remember," she cried, her small voice shaking. Axel nuzzled her shoulder, pressing his head against her scarred arm. His breath was soft, steady. A heartbeat made sound. The courtroom was still buzzing, but within that small circle, father, daughter, and dog, there was only quiet. Leon whispered into Axel's ear, the words catching between gratitude and tears. "You didn't speak, but you said everything that mattered." Axel leaned against him, eyes half closing, as if finally, after months of pain and silence, he could rest. And around them, even the judge, even the jurors, even the crowd of hardened officers and reporters found themselves blinking back tears, because they had just witnessed something that no law could define. Truth spoken through love. Axel had broken his silence, not for reward or command, but because Sophie's whisper had given him what no training ever could: forgiveness. The gavel struck again. Order was called. But no one heard it. The only sound that mattered was the soft exhale of a dog who had finally forgiven himself. Weeks passed after the trial, but the echoes of that courtroom moment refused to fade. The image of Axel, standing tall before his handler's attacker, had spread far beyond the courthouse walls. It was replayed on every news channel, splashed across magazine covers, and retold by anchors with trembling voices. The dog who testified with his heart. The headline ran everywhere, a symbol of loyalty that no courtroom could measure in legal terms. People didn't just see a dog. They saw devotion, sacrifice, and the kind of love that made the world believe again in something pure. For Leon Hale, however, the days that followed were quieter, slower, and somehow heavier. Justice had been served. Evan Kane was convicted on multiple charges, his own confession sealing his fate. But victory, Leon realized, came wrapped in silence, the kind that lingered after the applause faded. He stood on the steps of the courthouse that morning, sunlight warming his scarred hands. Reporters had gathered again, but this time not for scandal, for closure. Axel sat beside him, calm and proud in his polished K9 vest. Flashes went off as journalists crowded around, microphones thrust forward. "Officer Hale, how does it feel to see justice finally done? Will Axel return to active duty? Do you believe dogs can really understand justice?" Leon smiled faintly, his gaze drifting to the shepherd at his side. "Axel didn't testify because he understood justice," he said softly. "He did it because he understood love. And sometimes, that's enough." His voice trembled just slightly, and the crowd fell quiet. When they finally left the courthouse, Sophie skipped between her parents, holding Axel's leash like it was a crown jewel. The little girl had become a quiet celebrity herself, the child whose faith had brought the hero dog back to life. But in her small heart, none of it mattered except that Axel was safe, and her daddy was home again, Leon, Returned to duty 3 weeks later. The department welcomed him back with applause and handshakes, his reinstatement letter handed to him by Captain Morris himself. But when Leon stepped into the familiar K-9 wing, he felt a pang of nostalgia and something else, grief disguised as pride. Axel was waiting there, tail wagging once when he saw his partner. Leon crouched, resting his hand on the shepherd's shoulder. "Back where we started, huh?" he whispered. The training field looked the same. The dust, the posts, the morning mist. But Axel was different now. His gait had slowed a little. The scars beneath his fur were faint but permanent. Even his eyes, still sharp, carried a weight they hadn't before. Morris watched from a distance, arms crossed. "He's earned his rest, Leon. He's got nothing left to prove." Leon nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think he knows that too." Axel's ears twitched at the sound of his name. He nudged Leon's knee, pressing his head against the familiar uniform. Leon smiled, blinking away the sting behind his eyes. "Not bad for an old boy, huh?" Morris grinned faintly. "Old, maybe, but still the best we've got." The city arranged a ceremony in the department courtyard, a rare event where both officers and civilians gathered not for grief, but for gratitude. Banners hung from the walls, honoring Axel, service, sacrifice, heart. Leon stood on stage beside his wife and daughter, the crowd murmuring softly below. Sophie wore her favorite yellow dress, her hair tied back with a ribbon. In her hands, she clutched a small velvet box, her secret contribution to the day. Captain Morris took the podium. "There are moments in this job," he began, voice carrying through the speakers, "that remind us why we serve. Not for glory, not for medals, but for loyalty. The kind that doesn't question, doesn't hesitate, and doesn't fade." He looked toward Axel, who sat proudly at Leon's feet, chest high, gaze steady. Axel reminded this city what true courage looks like. He didn't need words to tell the truth. His heart did that for him. The applause swelled, thunderous and heartfelt. Officers removed their caps. Reporters lowered their cameras. Leon bent down, unfastening Axel's K-9 vest for the first time since the trial. Beneath it, the dog's fur had thinned, revealing old scars, marks of a life spent giving everything he had. Sophie stepped forward. The sunlight caught the tears shimmering in her eyes as she opened the little box. Inside lay a small, shining medal, engraved with the words, "For being brave twice." She knelt in front of Axel, her voice trembling with love. "This one's from me," she said softly, "for saving me and Daddy." Axel tilted his head, watching her carefully. As she pinned the medal to his collar, he licked her hand once, slow and deliberate, like a thank you only she could understand. The crowd went silent again. It was as if everyone knew they were witnessing something more than ceremony. It was a farewell, disguised as celebration. Leon's throat tightened. He crouched beside his partner, running his fingers through the fur between Axel's ears. "You've done enough, buddy," he whispered. "It's time to rest." Axel's eyes softened. His tail gave one slow wag. When Leon stood again, the entire force saluted, not to a man, but to the dog who had done what no officer ever could. The gesture rippled through the ranks, silent but powerful. The world called it justice. The papers called it a miracle. But to Leon, Claire, and Sophie, it was simply the closing of a story written in courage, one that began and ended with a heartbeat and a promise. That night, as the crowd dispersed and the courtyard emptied, Leon lingered with Axel beneath the glow of the streetlights. Sophie had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, the metal box clutched loosely against her chest. Leon looked down at his old partner. The city lights reflected softly in Axel's eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "they'll tell stories about you for years." Axel pressed his head gently against Leon's leg, a motion both grounding and goodbye. "You're tired, aren't you?" Leon whispered. "It's okay, boy. You've earned your peace." The dog's eyes closed halfway, as if in agreement. Leon's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the last trace of sunset bled into the night. He felt the warmth of the moment settle deep in his chest, bittersweet, proud, and heavy. He knew time was short now. Axel was older, slower, but his heart still beat with that same unbreakable rhythm, the rhythm of loyalty. And though the city would move on, though headlines would fade, one truth would never die. Heroes come in many forms. Some wear badges, and some simply walk beside us. The house sat quietly at the edge of town, where the hum of traffic gave way to the sound of crickets and the slow whisper of evening wind through tall grass. The air was warm, the kind of golden warmth that only came at the end of a long summer day. On the front porch, Axel lay stretched across his favorite spot, a wooden plank worn smooth beneath his weight. His fur had grayed slightly around the muzzle, his breathing slower now, deeper, like the rhythm of the earth itself. He wasn't the strong, invincible K9 of years past, but in the soft glow of sunset, he was something greater, peaceful, content, whole. Beside him, Sophie sat cross-legged with a book open in her lap. Her voice carried through the quiet air, small but clear as she read aloud from her story. Every few lines, she'd pause, showing Axel the pictures, even though she knew he couldn't really see them the same way she did. "See this part, Axel?" she said, turning a page. "The brave knight comes home after saving everyone. They give him a medal, just like yours." Axel's ears twitched. His tail gave the faintest wag. Sophie giggled softly. "I knew you'd like that part." The porch creaked behind them as Leon stepped out, holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed one to Claire, who joined him by the doorway. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply watched. The little girl with her storybook, and the old shepherd who had lived a dozen lifetimes in one. Leon's gaze softened. "You can tell he's slowing down," he murmured. Claire nodded, her voice quiet. "He's tired, but he's not in pain. Just resting." Leon took a sip of tea, his eyes never leaving his partner. He used to bark at every shadow. Now he just watches. He smiled faintly. Guess he finally trusts the world to take care of itself. The sunlight began to sink lower, painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. The metal on Axel's collar caught the light, reflecting it like a small flame, a reminder of all he had endured, all he had given. Sophie finished her story and closed the book. She looked down at Axel, her smile gentle. "You know," she whispered, "I think you're even braver than the knight." Axel lifted his head, dark eyes finding hers. He exhaled softly and rested his muzzle on Claire's knee. "She talks to him like he understands," Claire whispered. Leon smiled. "Maybe he does." The sun sank lower, the porch wrapped in golden calm. Sophie sat beside Axel, her hand moving gently through his fur. Slow, steady strokes. "Daddy?" she asked. "Will Axel dream tonight?" Leon knelt beside her, his voice tender. "Yeah, sweetheart. Maybe he'll dream of the fields he ran through, or the day you gave him his medal." Sophie nodded, eyes glistening. "I hope he dreams about us, too." Leon brushed a strand of hair from her face. "He will. You're his best girl." Axel's breathing grew shallow. His eyes flicked between them. The man who'd trusted him with his life, and the girl who'd given him her heart. Leon placed a hand on his side. "It's okay, buddy. You did your job. You brought us home." Sophie leaned close, her voice trembling. "You can rest now." The last light bathed them in gold. It glowed on Sophie's scar, a faint silver line, and on Axel's medal, warm in the fading sun. The shepherd took one final breath, tail moving once, then still. Silence followed, just wind and the creak of the porch. Leon's voice broke softly. "Rest now, partner." Sophie held Axel's paw, quiet tears falling onto his fur. Claire wrapped her arms around them both. Later, the porch sat empty, only Sophie's book and the medal left behind. From the dark came her older voice, gentle and sure. "He didn't speak our language, but he taught us love, forgiveness, and faith. He was more than a hero. He was family." In the end, Axel's story isn't just about a police dog. It's about what happens when love and loyalty go deeper than words. German shepherds like him remind us that real courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stays beside you, quietly, faithfully, through everything. If you've ever looked into your dog's eyes and felt that unspoken understanding, you already know what this story is really about. Trust, forgiveness, and the kind of love that heals more than it hurts. If you'd like to learn ways to strengthen that bond with your own dog, there's a wonderful little resource I came across recently that helps people connect more deeply with their companions. Through simple habits, not training tricks, you might find it as meaningful as I did. Take your time. Read it when you're ready. And tonight, when your dog curls up beside you, maybe give them an extra pat. For every Axel in the world who's ever loved without needing to be asked.